How do you spend $4 billion buying Marvel and still end up weakening the engine that made it valuable? That is the Disney paradox. Marvel was not bought as a rescue mission. It was bought as a growth engine, a franchise that could power movies, parks, merchandise, and eventually Disney+. And for a while, it looked unstoppable. Then the system got too big, too fast, too dependent on constant output. Marvel stopped feeling rare. It started feeling routine, and once that happened, the damage had already begun. Stay with this story, because the first crack in Marvel explains almost everything that came after. Before Disney, Marvel was already in motion. Iron Man launched in 2008, and the MCU grew slowly, film by film, with discipline. Disney acquired Marvel Entertainment in 2009 for about $4 billion, but the creative foundation was already there. Phase 1 had only 6 films. The audience had time to breathe. The universe had space to build. That slow pace was part of the magic. By the time the Infinity Saga ended, Marvel had become the highest-grossing film franchise in history, with more than $26 billion in global box office by mid-2022. Avengers: Endgame alone reached about $2.8 billion, turning the MCU into a global cultural force. Disney did not just own a hit, it owned the dominant franchise of the modern box office. And that created a new problem. When a company gets used to that level of dominance, growth stops being a choice and starts becoming an expectation. Marvel was no longer just a studio. It became a strategic asset, expected to perform everywhere at once. The real shift came after Endgame. Disney Plus launched in 2019, and Marvel quickly became one of its core pillars. That changed the structure of the franchise. Marvel was no longer just making films. It was producing television series tied directly into the cinematic universe. In 2021 alone, the MCU released 4 films and 5 television series. Between 2021 and 2023, Disney's streaming push led to 10 MCU series, in addition to 9 films. Phase 4 ended up containing more content in a much shorter window than the entire first 12 years of the franchise. That is where the danger started. Marvel stopped feeling rare. It started feeling constant. And when a franchise becomes constant, it risks becoming routine. Critics kept using the same words: oversaturation, Marvel fatigue, homework plots, tonal incoherence, weak CGI. The problem was not just quantity. It was the feeling that everything had to connect, and that every story existed to support the next one. That is a dangerous place for any franchise. Because once the audience starts feeling obligation instead of excitement, the brand has already changed. Inside Disney, the pressure was obvious. The company had turned streaming into a strategic war, and Marvel was one of the weapons. That created a mandate for more content, more characters, more spin-offs, more calendar coverage. Kevin Feige later admitted the problem directly. He said Marvel produced about 50 hours of stories between 2007 and 2019, then well over 100 hours in half the time afterward. He called it too much, and said that for the first time, quantity had trumped quality. He also said there was corporate pressure to use the characters people had been asking for. Bob Iger said almost the same thing from the top of the company. He said Disney had flooded its streaming platform with content, that quantity does not necessarily create quality, and that the company had lost a little focus by making too much. He then said Disney would reduce output and put more emphasis on quality, especially at Marvel. That is the strategic mistake in one sentence. Disney treated Marvel like a content supply chain. But Marvel had originally worked because it felt like a carefully engineered event system. Once the event became constant, the tension disappeared, and with it, some of the magic. The results showed up fast. The post-Endgame era still produced hits, but the emotional certainty was gone. Films like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 still performed well, but the overall cultural temperature was different. In 2023, the Marvels opened with the lowest weekend in MCU history and finished as the franchise's lowest grossing entry at about $206 million worldwide. That mattered not because one movie failed, but because it confirmed a larger pattern. The criticism was also consistent. Audiences and reviewers complained about perfunctory CGI climaxes, boring ensembles, convoluted plots, and visual effects that looked rushed. Black Widow, Shang-Chi, Eternals, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Thor, Love and Thunder, She-Hulk, and Quantumania all became part of the same conversation. Too much content, not enough care. Even when Marvel still had a huge ceiling, the brand had changed. It no longer felt untouchable. It felt managed, and that is a very different thing. Comment below with your take. Did Marvel weaken because Disney pushed too much content, or because the story engine was never meant to run this fast? The contrast with the pre-Endgame era is brutal. Before Disney Plus pressure took over, Marvel's biggest run felt focused, paced, and event-driven. A single year could include Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Spider-Man, Homecoming, Thor, Ragnarok, and Black Panther. A lineup that felt like a blueprint bending without breaking. Post-Endgame, the same universe started to feel like a machine that could not stop producing. The lesson is bigger than Marvel. Scale is not the same as sustainability. A franchise can be the strongest thing in a company and still be weakened by the company's own ambition. Disney did not break Marvel with one bad movie. It broke Marvel by turning a carefully paced mythos into a perpetual output system. That is the real risk of corporate expansion. When content becomes a quota, the audience feels it. When every project exists to fuel the next one, the story loses oxygen. And when a legacy brand is asked to carry infinite growth, the brand eventually starts to bend. Not all at once, but enough for people to notice. If this kind of strategic breakdown matters to you, subscribe now, because the next story goes even deeper into how entertainment empires overreach. Marvel was supposed to prove that Disney could dominate the future. Instead, it revealed the cost of making a franchise serve the machine. And that is where the next chapter begins.